if people don't object. Oh, it's already on. Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to the first Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes call after all continents have agreed on being on wintertime. I think the last one, unfortunately, got a little bit derailed by the fact that the Europeans wanted to join an hour later than the folks in the US. So I think now is actually the time where what we discussed in the initial call, where we wanted to see what the common interest of the group is in terms of topics. And as preparation for this call, I put in the topic suggestions that we had so far into a Slack poll. And I think Gabe also added another topic in there. So I think going by the votes, it looks like meanwhile we have a majority vote for RHEL-int for Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes, with 8 people voting for that, and then I think we even have a tie with like the dual approach of discussing BOSH-based Cloud Foundry and container-based Cloud Foundry, and if and how this should go in parallel. So I guess as we have a tie in those, any preference which topic to start with? I'm kind of inclined to suggest the RHEL-int topic, but if there's other
is there a doc for this meeting?
Well, there actually is. If you have the Slack channel open, it's also linked in the Slack channel title. So there we have like the
I'll drop it in the Zoom
regular
chat.
agenda Google Doc.
Jinx, Marco.
Oh yeah, thanks, Marco. Good. So, any preference for like in between those two topics in terms of starting with one of those?
I split the time. I voted for RHEL-int.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, good. Then
deal. I'm not going to argue with that.
Let's start with RHEL-int for Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes. Any initial thoughts from the round? Who actually suggested it?
I have a minimal thought.
A minimal.
Sorry, Vlad, you go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that I pinged Sai this. I think it was last week, but I think he might be on vacation or out of office. So waiting for him to get back to start a conversation around the pipelines that we currently have for kubectl. We have built quite a lot around that, and yeah, I think there's just a few things missing to have just an entire flow that reacts on changes for stem cells, releases, and gets you a result saying, hey, this kubectl passes cats. I wanted to present that to him and to others interested and see where we can go from there.
That sounds good.
So Vlad, those are things that are still taking inputs as like BOSH releases and BOSH deployment manifests and running those through the CF operator toolchain?
Yes, but it doesn't have to be that way forever. We're adding the entanglement feature, right? Quarks links. So that'll allow you to mix in kube native things like Helm charts together with your BOSH stuff. And I wanted to say one more thing. I forgot, but yeah, that's the plan.
So at this point, how is Irene consumed in that overall tool chain? Is it like still the Irene BOSH release, or is it like the Kubernetes native stuff?
I think there's only
tiers for anything but the Bosch stuff. Like Jules, you had it in the backlog of the Arini team, right? To look at it again, to like use the Helm chart.
Sorry, I think I'm being slow. I had what exactly in the backlog?
Like to look again at like how would the Arini Helm chart integrate with the CF operator instead of using the Bosch release.
Oh, I see. Yes, we did. I think we already did actually have an initial spike on that, and we hit a few problems that I think we surfaced with you, and the things that we would need in order to be able to do that. I don't know if we have a follow-on story to look back at it, but we could.
Yes, after talking with Alexander, it sounds like these entanglements will help. They're in progress.
Are you actually
right
calling
now.
them entanglements? Because that is the best thing ever.
That's amazing, yeah.
Score.
Yeah, and I think Arini is the first piece that we can actually replace easily.
That's good. That's good. That does sound really good. And I mean, one thing that I think is very clear is that between what we have now and the CF operator, I will take the CF operator very, very keenly. So I'm keen for that to happen. Whether or not there's some simpler thing as well, that's another conversation. But I'd love to get there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you say what we have now, what do you have now?
So yeah, this is one thing I want to say. I don't know. I mean, this is kind of a not for nothing, but kind of underlines the importance. I think. I mean, to me anyway. I sent the 1.0 Irinia's 1.0 email out today, and yay, and that's really good. But you know, there's a line in there that's, you know, it says this is bringing Cloud Foundry to Kubernetes, blah blah blah, easy. And then I literally found myself apologizing for the fact that when people go to the repo, it's going to suck. And that it's not ideal, right? And the reason it sucks, even though it's 1.0, is it's not a thing we can solve or should solve, I think, in the Irini team. But it is people's first contact with Irini, right? They're going to try and install it, and it's not going to look very Kubernetes at all. And it's not going to be much fun, and they're going to have problems because we have problems whenever we try to roll that out. So, I mean, it isn't the Irini team's first priority because it isn't something we should be solving. But if I'm honest, I think it is the biggest priority for Irini's success. So I guess I mean, there's no action there other than I really think that getting so there's like the ideal that we want to get to, I think, and we all know what that looks like. But I think right now it'd be really good if we could kind of get something that's an MVP that someone else owned and can start making better. Because right now we just have this crappy SCF based thing because we needed something to let people consume Irini, and I can't lie, it sucks. Please help.
So I know we've got representatives from the networking program here as one of the other core component teams that's contributing, and that is, I think, maybe the farthest along in terms of deviating from Bosch packaged artifacts. So it might be interesting to hear from either you, Gabe, or Utako, or Shannon about your perspective as another contributing team that release integration would be helping to integrate.
Go ahead, Gabe.
It would be great to have some release integration. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
I think like if you look at the code we have right now, it's not Boshy at all. It's just and so we'd love to start building out an integrated release of Cloud Foundry that continues in that pattern.
That kind of reminds me. I mean, we have, so my other hat obviously is with the Garden team. And Garden is going to try and start taking on the work of owning like the pod security policies and that kind of stuff from Irini. And we have the exact same problem. Even though I'm the Irini PM, I have no idea how to tell the Garden team how to integrate that stuff with Irini right now. And you know, it's all YAML files. It'd be absolutely ludicrous to ship that as a Bosch release. It would be it'll be comic. But I don't actually know the better way right now. Yeah.
Is it okay, the timeline that we have for December? So you could integrate that with Quarks links?
Maybe. Maybe. I mean, December's not that far off, I guess.
You could start hacking on it once we get the feature in. It's maybe 1 to 2 sprints away. Because you don't actually need it to be 1.0 to start hacking on it. And then all you do is YAMLs, right? You're just working on a Helm chart and integrating with the others.
That sounds plausible. That would at least plausibly fit. If what we're shipping is just YAML files, I guess we don't really care about the fact that there's actually some Bosch going on.
Yeah. Like I say, I mean, the kubecf repo right now has a YAML that's a CF deployment. But you can chip away at that until there's nothing left.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that we all want release integration, but we don't have anybody who is currently responsible for or probably willing to adopt the responsibility of release integration for CF on Kubernetes. But it has been discussed. We had within Pivotal, we had a big meeting for the folks who contribute to the application service. And release integration was there. So they're aware of the need. I think it's just a matter of prioritization and staffing.
When we talk about release integration, we really mean having pipelines that build all the Cloud Foundry components, that integrate the Cloud Foundry components and try to pass CATs. And
that's right. That's what the release integration team currently does with CF deployment.
Cool. So
that brings me to one question. Will there be a relation between CF deployment and the upcoming release integration for Kubernetes somehow? So will we see the same version of the UAA with the same CVEs, etc., or will that all diverge in a magic way?
If I could answer that. So first, I wanted to say that what we're currently doing for kubecf is exactly that. We have 2 sets of pipelines. One we call pre-publish. That one is used to gate PRs. It runs one set of CATs, sorry, not CATs yet, just smoke tests right now on the PR that you're building. To see if it's green or not. And then we have a post-publish pipeline. That one can actually run a matrix of tests that involves multiple kube versions and multiple feature sets. So say you have cube 113, 114, and 115, and you want to test with Diego and with Irene, it should run that entire matrix of tests. So that's what we're currently working on for pipelines. And to answer the question about CF deployment, kubecf is now tied to a particular CF deployment. Right now it's 8.0, but we are just bumping in this sprint to 12.1, I think.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I think what is probably the least clear is like how will release integration look like for the non-Boschi world? Like, it's like you can now cut out of the like CF operator starting with Irene, but like how are we going to manage like a handful of Helm charts or whatever we are going to use? I think that's the thing that we should start thinking about. The
hoping
CF operator time.
I'm hoping that we can use these feature flags, what we call feature flags, in the Helm chart. You have the main Helm chart, that's the kubecf, and then our spike with NATS was using NATS as a subchart of that. And then you have a flag in your values YAML saying, okay, which type of NATS do you want? Do you want the Bosch-based one, or do you want the a native one? So once you have that feature flag, you can also put that in the test matrix. So then you can test with the Bosch nats or with the cube nats. And then you can also template using that feature to control whether you activate the ops file that removes nats and use the Helm chart instead. So I think the mechanisms are there to allow us to, one at a time, replace each instance group with a native counterpart.
Yeah, I think the missing pieces in my head anyway are two things. One is to have a repo I can point people at. So in the Irini release documentation, instead of us telling people how to deploy a CF, what I really want to be able to do is point them to a place with instructions for deploying CF, if you see what I mean.
Exactly.
And that thing should automatically have the latest stuff that I published. And one thing I think we're slightly missing is in the kind of Bosch world, there's like Bosch IO. We like publish the latest release and Relink can just pull that down, if you see what I mean. And we need some sort of similar kind of control point or whatever, like some way of coordinating so Garden can ship the latest security YAMLs and they get consumed, and networking can do the latest networking YAML they consume. That's one thing I think we're missing. The other thing is I totally see where you're going, and I think it's a good direction to like start with this overall thing and the flavors to configure different things out and stuff. But I would also say I think we do need, so there's like a conceptual overhead to this whole Cloud Foundry beast, if you see what I mean. And that's fine if you want the whole conceptual overhead. But I think we do need a minimal CF, which might well use the same stuff. Like maybe it just uses the operator and a more minimal operator. But I think having a minimal CF that's just 5 things early is kind of important. Like I think if you're saying to someone, hey, just pick up this Cloud Foundry thing. I mean, I've had this conversation. You say, pick up this Cloud Foundry thing. And they say, oh, it's just this, there's like 30 containers and I don't know how to operate it. And then you say, have you seen Istio at all? But it doesn't matter. Istio. It's, but anyway, so those to me are the two gaps from what I think you're describing, which is like 80% of the way there, but that's the 20%.
I have a, go ahead.
Sorry, for the first item that you mentioned, we moved to GitHub issues for the kubecf repo. So you could, if you could please open an issue there, and we can start chatting there, and we'll make it happen.
I'm curious. I know that there aren't people from the release integration team here to really listen, but I am curious to maybe surface some requirements from the folks who are here about what we would want. One question I have for people is Bosch IO, what we ship in terms of Bosch releases is source code effectively under the hood, but the sort of standard way of deploying or shipping artifacts in the Kubernetes world is container images. And I'm curious if folks have preferences or thoughts about whether component teams ought to be shipping one or the other or both.
This brings us on to another thing, actually. I'd like to create some controversy, please. There's this obvious problem that we have, that we don't have enough requirements from real developers telling us how things should work, right? And that often causes problems. Like the thing with CF, if we're honest, is it has focused on CTO requirements and not developer requirements. And that's a problem, right? It should worry the crap out of us that the first answer when you ask how most Cloud Foundry teams should ship things isn't CF. The vast majority of components, in fact, all of them, if you take away MySQL, are 12-factor apps, and if they're not, they should be. The fact that they don't want to use CF, and we're not, like, we should be asking why isn't the answer CF, and what would you have to add to CF so we could self-host everything that isn't the very core bit. And if the feedback is no way because CF sucks, I want to ask why a number of times and then fix it.
And when you say
to nut that down, just to add like one bullet point to that. So in my opinion, the answer to Gabe's question is KPAC and some YAML, and I should be able to CF push everything.
I was just about to ask, like when you say use CF, you essentially mean use Cloud Foundry staging and get a container image out of that process that then might be packaged in Chart.
I would think every component, other than maybe Cappy, although Cappy probably should be able to just sit on top of some Irini CRD and Irini, probably should be CF pushable. I mean, we probably have to add a feature or two. Like maybe you have to have a feature that if you bind service kube config or service account or whatever, you get the ability to actually hit the Kubernetes API, right? Like we can just give you the kube config as an environment variable if you bind service Kubernetes, right? Because a few of our things are going to need to talk to Kubernetes API, like networking. But other than that, I mean, they're all 12-factor apps. Why wouldn't they all go through CF?
But don't we have that cyclic dependency there? Like because what you say, Jules, sounds like a runtime dependency of some sort. Like what I had in mind rather was to say, let's use KPAC as kind of a standalone thing running somewhere to, at least in the first step, generate container images. And then obviously it's a different question on how those are assembled during runtime.
I mean, Bernd, I think it's a bootstrapping problem, clearly. But like I agree with Jules that the majority of stuff in CF should be actually like pushable as a 12-factor app. So it might be worth looking at how we could like do a minimal bootstrap, and from that point forward, nobody should care about writing YAMLs about Kubernetes deployments,
right?
But just get them.
Quite likely they can't use all the features, right? You can't use container networking or whatever, right? Because container networking is for like the minimal set, you would think.
And coming back to Gabe's initial question, that means we'd rather ship code than actual Docker images and then have the platform take care of it. Did I interpret that correctly?
If we don't think that is correct, then that tells us something about CF. And there's probably a missing feature right then.
Or to spin it maybe more positively, I understand that obviously the colleagues from SUSE want to use SLES as their base container image, and there's others that probably want to use something else.
Right.
I'd say most of the CF stuff would probably also work on distroless. So.
Yeah.
Sure
and I would hope that KPAC solves this use case. And if it doesn't, we should be figuring out how it does.
Yeah, I mean, we at Pivotal have a similar concern around ensuring that we can ship container images that we can support with our licensing. And so it's likely that that would be different in some ways from a Docker image that's produced in the community.
Just a question here, but if you just install the bare bones CF deployment, there's no component that you can take out and have the CF CLI still work. You can't take out routing, logging, controller, or UAA, which are just, these are all the pieces you need.
I mean, right now, Irini is just the core thing, right? And I would think, for example, like networking, the stuff that the network team are producing isn't in Irini right now. And I don't think they're going to remove everything from Irini. So I don't see why they couldn't CF push what they're producing on top of it, for example. Similarly, I mean, UAA, I would think they could. I don't know. I mean
maybe keeping in line with the bootstrapping notion, there's like, you have to maybe go from single user mode to multi-user mode.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like maybe a core set of features that we can use, and a lot of them will break. And maybe we do need to add some stuff to make this possible. It just seems like super unhealthy. Like, given we have a lack of good feedback from developers, and we have a load of developers, like what better way to get empathy for people's problems using CF and what they would want to change in a Kubernetes native CF than to, So yeah, there's probably a bit of extra effort to do it, but it seems like it paid back.
So one thing that I like, how I want to renew, but I kind of not agree, is that on Cloud Foundry components we can push a bit more on developers and have more limitations for developers than we should ask from the community, from the users, end users.
Yes.
Like we can ask people, please have different, let's say, health, like readiness endpoint and liveness endpoint.
Right.
We can say, like, I think like this. Then I think from the Cloud Foundry community, like from Cloud Foundry component author, we don't need to make people push the source code. We'll push Docker images. So we can require something on Docker images level. And like, if we just get some tiny part from Marine that gets scheduling, that might be helpful. I'm not sure how important it is from the Irene backlog, but yeah, I am with you on this concern. That for me it feels that we need something like Cloud Foundry to deploy Cloud Foundry components, and then we'll have to migrate end users to this, like from this Irene and current weight with stateful sets, and some better way where we deploy applications, because I don't think there will be one-to-one mapping from the applications we allow to CF push right now, and how components for the applications that use Kubernetes should be deployed. You need more things for components that deploy Kubernetes. At least right now, you probably need to specify networking policy already, and we shouldn't wait for Irene or to all Cloud Foundry components to be valid enough or ready enough before we saying that it's good enough for developers. We might go with some other way, and then, as I said, at some point, your dream might come true that we'll do CF push a component that will enable routing and everything, but we too far away from there, and
maybe it's the way C++ bootstraps. You've got like this like C99 compiler, like a minimal C that it actually compiles with, right? Maybe there's just like a CF CLI. It's just like a bash script that you say CF, but it only knows how to CF push, but it takes the same inputs the user would do, and you use it the same way, but it does it directly against Irene or whatever. I don't know, whatever. Again, this is why I really wish that, because you're right, I don't think this is in the Irene backlog, right? I think this is in some other team's backlog. I think there's a team that needs to figure this out. But I think someone should figure out some path that lets us all try and dog food the CF thing. And it probably looks like KPAC and one or two other things the developers have to produce, and some way of shipping those images around, those source images.
I mean, yeah, a single user mode copy could be able to actually take CF push for UAA and a multi-user copy that then replaces the other one.
Right. I mean, maybe single user mode. Maybe if the interface to Irene, which I think it probably should be, and this is another topic, but if the interface between CC and Irene was just a CRD that CC was creating, then and CC just added UAA and all the nice stuff and all the other things around it, then the minimal CC, if you see what I mean, would just create a CRD for Cappy. Right, it'd just be you just create an Irene app CRD with a reference to a KPAC desired image.
Yeah, I mean, I think those seem like attractive goals in terms of effectively dogfooding CF more for CF component development and deployment.
Yes.
I do think we want to balance those against getting the system working and having it be stable.
Yes.
If we have a self-hosting platform that doesn't work very well, then
completely agree. And yes, yeah, I agree. I think the knowing where we want to go, assuming that that's where we want to go, we just figure out what's the minimal steps that's not taking us away from that, which probably looks a lot like KPAC and something pretty minimal above it for like properties or whatever.
I know Zach has been interested in promoting this line of dogfooding and reasoning on the component teams as well. So I think I might have mentioned last time that the CAPI team's been doing a couple different tracks of work around both containerizing Cloud Controller more directly and starting to produce a Helm chart for that, at least in API mode. So one, they're also interested in integrating that into a larger CF distribution for their own CI integration. But then they've been interested in building that with cloud native build packs. The sticking point for them is that I don't think there's an officially supported or integrated Ruby cloud native build pack yet. That's somewhere on the CNB roadmap. And I think there's like some early version of it, but like if you look at the default builders that come with KPAC, it's not listed in that set yet. So I don't think it's completely ready yet. I mean, along those lines, Cloud Controllers also, they have done some exploratory work to integrate with KPAC itself to run staging tasks. Not that that would be required at this level for the kind of dogfooding that we're talking about for component development, but it's at least on their radar, and they're kind of figuring out where those themes are, and that could start dragging in the KPAC resources as well, right, as the core of that staging task infrastructure.
Hey, any more thoughts on that? Maybe question to Gabe and Shannon, like how would things work with like Istio there in that whole context? Would that be something that anyhow needs to be in the cluster already, or is that like, would that be compatible with build packs? I guess not, right?
I don't have any pre-existing strong opinions about that. I really like this idea of dogfooding. I think if we ship source code, it helps us all with a number of needs. And so perhaps this is design pressure on whatever we're building here to be able to consume and deploy from source third-party dependencies like Istio, for example. It's an interesting thought.
But if you do have source code which could run on Kubernetes, you don't want to make it dependent on CF, right? Because what we really want is more Kubernetes, and we want to keep the user experience from Cloud Foundry. So I understand the dogfooding part because it puts a lot of pressure, but I think the priority should be to run on Kubernetes and not to run on Cloud Foundry.
I feel like we're not saying that it's going to require the whole Cloud Foundry there. I think we're talking about using some of the core components that Cloud Foundry uses as a way of like deploying some of these essential system components, right? So like if you wanted to build your container image some other way, then you wouldn't need KPAC.
Right, and if it's the case that adding Cloud Foundry to a Kubernetes is too heavyweight a way for people to install all the other stuff, that tells us something about CF being too heavyweight for people, right? If we wouldn't use it to deploy our stuff, why would anyone else not have that problem, right? If like everyone else has the same problem of wanting it to be Kubernetes native and not wanting to build a thing that's too tightly integrated to Cloud Foundry, right? We have to make Cloud Foundry in the same way that Helm is or anything like that, something that people are willing to install, and Istio and everything like that, something that's lightweight enough that people will install it on their clusters and that they're happy to use as an option to deploy stuff, I think. And to the extent that it isn't, it needs to be.
But Helm 2, for example, I don't think anybody is happy to install it on their cluster. That's why they do Helm 3, right? And it's less.
Right. And that's why right now we're like Helm 2, and we need the design pressures to be like Helm 3. I think.
Do we have some? I know that I've heard anecdotes of Cloud Foundry being difficult to install because it requires Bosch knowledge, and you need a really, really large amount of VMs. But if you have a couple of Helm installs, even now, if it's SCF, how do you know that that's too heavyweight or that it's insufficient?
I'm really glad you asked, because it gives me the opportunity to be really tongue-in-cheek. I know by us consuming it, and if it's too heavyweight for us, it's too heavyweight for everyone. And if it's not, it's not.
I know that consuming it from a developer standpoint can be quite tough, especially if you want to switch stuff out, and especially for SCF because it's going through the whole Bosch thing. But as a day zero experience for a customer, it's really easy. Really easy. It's like 2 Helm installs and you got a CF 15 minutes later. And day one is also not. Yeah.
All right, sorry, Lad. I also wonder, I mean, if you're saying it's from the developer experience, isn't it true that any of the operations level stuff is just too much? And that's what makes Cloud Foundry great, when somebody else has set it up already. So I'm not sure what level of panacea we're trying. I understand what you're saying, Jules, on the KPAC model and such, and good to explore that. But I'm thinking that there's a little bit of a perception that, oh, look, it's a slightly easier now is still going to be too much for some developers.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'd say it needs to pass the dog food test. That's all, right? I'm not saying it needs to be the easiest thing in the world, but I'm saying if we aren't willing to use it, then it's too heavy, right? If it's heavy, but we're willing to use it, cool.
I mean, there might be applications or parts of Cloud Foundry where this is totally beneficial to go through the whole components we have in CF, but I wouldn't want to force any team not to just go Cube native, put a Helm chart in there, done.
I think that's a really I think this is a really good example, right? I think what you're saying is completely valid and is identifying a requirement. And that requirement is a lot of teams, in order to use CF, will require that there's a way to deploy their stuff without CF. So given that we're using KPAC, we should make sure that it's possible for people to just directly deploy their things simply without going through the CF stuff. Because what you're saying is a requirement. And a lot of our teams, a lot of our developers will like the networking team, I think, should be producing something. And Garden certainly is going to try and produce something that can be usefully used outside CF, right? People should be able to just adopt our pod security policies if they want to. If the thing we produce can only be deployed with CF, we won't be able to do that goal. Therefore, we're going to get a requirement that it's easy to go from this stuff without the whole CF. I think it's actually an exception that proves the rule. You see what I mean?
And I mean, if we would need to force CF component developers to use CF instead of doing the Kubernetes way, then we have a problem.
Yes.
Then why should anybody else want to use CF instead of Kubernetes native?
Yes. And I'll go further. I bet we do have that problem. I bet we do have that problem. And I want to fix that problem. But the only way we'll figure out where those problems are, I think, is by feeding them. Right? We need the empathy right now.
I don't know. For me, I feel like I need to think about it more because I think deploying CF components on CF is not 100% the same thing as the value proposition we're proposing to our customers.
I mean, it's probably the case that, I mean, no, it's not only probably the case, right? It is the case that we will also need a unified CF and a way to deploy it all. Right. I would hope that day to day, developers just use CF to deploy new versions and have that developer productivity. And again, in the same way that we will have a requirement that as well as doing that, we're going to want to package up the whole thing and be able to install it places as a Helm chart. Every CF user, 9% of CF users will have the same requirement, and we're going to need to solve that requirement from them. I think one of the problems CF has is that it doesn't have a good answer to that story of how do I package up all my CF microservices. I got this, it's really fast to develop them, and it was low barrier, and my time to first win was really low. But how do I package it all up in a way that makes sense and put it in a Helm chart? We don't have a good answer to that today, but we should. And that answer might well be that I can take a set of these things with KPAC and whatever and easily convert it into a thing that your generic operator can then install and run.
I'm not sure I agree there, Julian. I understand the empathy that you might gain by developing software that can be CF pushed. But back to echoing some other sentiments that I heard here. If we're developing CF to enable enterprise software developers to push Helm charts to Kubernetes, we're missing the point.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm not saying that's what CF is for. I'm saying if it's not possible to take the thing, if there isn't an easy way to evolve your thing, right? You used CF, but now you want to take that thing that you produced and package it up so another person can consume it. That seems like a problem. I mean, I think it's a common problem. I think one of the reasons people really like Docker and Helm and all these things is because as well as it being consumable by them, they can give it to someone else and they can install it on their cluster and it will work the same way.
I don't understand. I haven't seen this problem. I'm aware that users of CF produce source code and an application manifest, and it just works.
It absolutely does, as long as you've got one of them. As long as you've got one application, that it doesn't work if you spread across like multiple repos, for example.
I want to ask one more question. I know that it's important for each project to be able to stand on its own, not because there might be third parties that are interested in consuming them, but because I think it should have clearer API contract and loosely coupled architectures. I do remember though Lattice, which I think was a good idea at the time, because I remember thinking that having an HTTP contract between the cloud controller and the runtime was a good idea, but it didn't take off. And I think it also required a lot of resources to maintain the project. So, yeah, I think if you have all the pieces that are good and you also integrate them very well, no one will care about the individuals anymore. They will always want the entire thing, the whole cake. Like if we have a really good logging solution and we have a really good scheduling system and we have a good auth thing, they will always take the whole pie.
I'm not sure that's, I mean, that wasn't the case for Docker or Kubernetes. Right, Docker was all about batteries included, but tons of people swapped the batteries. Ditto Kubernetes.
Fair enough. So But I mean, that's just about the container mechanism, right?
I will say the thing. Thing about Lattice. Lattice didn't work. I think we took the wrong message from that. If I'm honest, I think Lattice was multi-touch phones before the iPhone, and we had a multi-touch phone that didn't work, and we took the message that there's no value in multi-touch phones, and the actual answer was our multi-touch phone sucked. We hadn't done it right. The fact that Lattice fails doesn't mean that it's not a good idea to
of course.
have our components be independently consumable. It means that component didn't take off, and that was a piece of knowledge that we
I didn't mean the architecture part. I think the architecture, we should have kept that. I just meant trying to market the component
right
as a reusable project, things like that.
Right.
I think the components should be reusable on their own, but I feel like we shouldn't expect or make it or consider it a failure if third parties don't adopt them.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, yeah. I think we should make it possible that some of these will take off, but not all of them will, right? Not all of them will get their own ecosystem around them. But you lose every game you don't play, I guess.
It's really a matter of priorities, and I would suggest that anybody developing a component which contributes to Cloud Foundry as a whole should be prioritizing the outcomes that Cloud Foundry delivers.
Yes.
Over any hope or ideas that the component could be used on its own.
So they should prioritize it. I agree as far as that. They should prioritize it. One strength and weakness of the way we build software is if we don't intentionally do something, we are very good at not doing it, if you see what I mean. And the whole process is based around not doing anything you didn't intend to do. So that the only way we'll ever spend any effort on it even being possible that any of these things will be independently consumable is intentionally, which is how it should be, right? But it also means that if we don't do that, we won't do that. What I would say is, it's not the main goal of any project, but I think every project should be spending some effort, not all effort, but some effort on it, on there being the possibility of an ecosystem around that thing, because otherwise they all get replaced and then we play catch up, and that is just strategically, it's just with 10% more effort, there's a very good chance of a very good return. I think it's worth rolling those dice on a few projects.
I see it like from the networking standpoint, what we're doing is barely developing anything new. We're just integrating existing stuff. Like we're going to integrate this existing open source Istio thing into this existing Irene thing and just try to string it together so it works and expose as many service mesh features as we can in a reasonable way. And so I don't see that integration itself as being a whole lot of value on its own. I see us working in service of this larger goal of the whole thing being useful as a simple entity.
I imagine Jules is referring to components that may have been purpose-built for, or may be in the future purpose-built for CF and them having potential life of their own, like, I don't know, UAA or something.
Right, UAA is a big example. I think KPAC are doing the exact right thing, right? The fact that build packs were only consumable inside before, it was the right thing for CF, but had build packs earlier spent more time making that something that could have had its own thing around them, I think that would have been valuable. Networking, I don't know. I don't have enough context to really comment. I would say with a little tongue in cheek, but not that much, that I don't know what Knative is, other than an interface on top of Istio that makes it very slightly easier to configure.
They're not even using Istio instead of Knative anymore.
Right. They're now an abstraction above it. I think that we could underestimate the value of a high-level API to some of these things that simplify stuff. But I don't know that much about the networking stuff, so I don't really know. but it feels to me like there's plausible value in something that makes it easy to configure the networking stuff, because the networking stuff is real hard if you haven't been close to it for a while.
I got an idea. We could have a public API that allows you to associate routes with applications. Oh, we've got one of those.
Well, I mean, I would say if we split that up, right? Like, I would like to be able to consume a public API that lets me associate routes with apps and services without necessarily needing the whole rest of CF. And I think there would be quite a good use case, at least to me, right? I think there's lots of people with their own stuff deployed and stuff that they're happy with that would like this nice, easy API that does the stuff that networking does. So let's say it makes it easy to do container networking and configures a network policy for you.
I feel like I joined this conversation about halfway through, and I'm kind of wondering about the goal of the conversation at the moment. It's been rambling about a few different things.
We have drifted.
We started out on release integration. We all want a CF. We all want to know how to deploy CF on Kubernetes.
Okay.
And my takeaways here are, it sounds like Vlad is working on something called CF Cube or Cube CF, and they have pipelines. And I would expect that anybody who, from Pivotal or otherwise, wants to contribute to our dream of having some one place and one artifact, easy way of deploying CF on Kubernetes might contribute to, collaborate with, or learn from what Vlad is doing.
So, and those are all designed to integrate with, I mean, those feed into CF operator, right? And so, I mean, as we're talking about like the heavyweightness of the system, you know, that's potentially part of the concern is like, well, how much, you know, additional machinery is there that is required to run what we think of as CF as this packaged solution. So I guess one question that was coming to mind to me as we're talking about like, okay, how are we going to interleave lower level Kubernetes resources? Like, let's say we get to the point where we end up actually just having a collection of Helm charts. Like, we've cut out all of the BOSH pieces of that, and we have Helm charts that are deploying lower level Kubernetes resources, whether they're, you know, deployments or CRDs or Istio virtual services or whatever, but none of the custom things that CF operator is managing, you know, either the BOSH deployment or some of the extended resources that it defines as lower level targets. Like, at that point, would the dependence on CF operator just go away? Would it all be client side?
I think you still need an operator for lifecycle management. So when some component changes, you want to restart other components. And well, I think also the installation, the initial deployment is complicated enough so that you don't want to do it with the Helm charts because of the dependencies and configuration and all of that.
Yeah, we could probably say that with some experience. I mean, you know, we're talking a lot about this is all the work that BOSH had done over time, and now we're just trying to figure out, hey, what does Kubernetes actually subsume and what does it not? Because it doesn't do everything, or it's learning to do new things. So it is a moving target at the same time, and that's kind of what we're trying to cover here.
How much of that dependency ordering is due to the BOSH Chrome around the components themselves versus the inherent dependencies of the essential features of the components?
Yeah, so I think like many of the things, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I think like many of the things that we currently see in the BOSH releases in CF deployment are there because of historic reasons, right? BOSH gave you an interface to do certain things in a certain way. It has like certain lifecycle hooks. People tend to put stuff in there. You have a way to like block until something happens, so you do it. You have a way to have an enforced ordering in the update, like during an update in your manifest, so you do it. You have a way to switch on serial true, right? To say like, hey, I want to have these things updated in serial. Don't do it ever in parallel. So you do it. Like Kubernetes doesn't expose many of these switches.
Only if you have an operator.
Right.
Well, wait a
How
second.
many of the switches are good ideas?
Yeah, exactly. Like, suppose we took the mindset of a Kubernetes native developer who says we're not going to put in explicit dependency ordering. Instead, we're going to expose a status on our resource that indicates whether we're healthy or not, and if not, the reason why we're not healthy. And then we can just deploy everything at once and wait for it to all become healthy as sort of components come up and resolve themselves. Like, if we threw away all of that legacy garbage, wouldn't we end up with a simpler and easier to deploy system?
Yeah, I mean, so this is so this is exactly where I was getting at, right? I wasn't advocating for, hey, we need to now find a way to build lots of custom code to replicate this exact functionality. My opinion is exactly the opposite. It's really that I think we can throw away like most of this stuff to some extent. I think like all of those scripts are there like for a reason, right? People figured out a way how to operate their component in like one situation or another. Like, hey, something needs to be done before you shut down stuff. Okay, there is a drain script. Let me put stuff in there. Obviously, you would do things differently when you're creating a Kubernetes native application. And that makes perfect sense, right? I don't want to like advocate for, hey, let's all build now custom Go code to replicate whatever the Bosch directory used to do during an update. That's like the exact opposite of what I would like to achieve. So I think like
one thing that I would add to that, it's like all these runtimes features of Bosch are very useful, and they have dictated the design of components. But I think one main aspect of Bosch that we don't have a counterpart even now with the operator is the release integration piece. Exactly what we're talking about, which is CF deployment. It gives you this way to bring out all the software and make sure that it works every time. And as I said, I haven't seen yet, so if anyone knows, please let me know, of a system on Kubernetes that's as complex as Cloud Foundry being deployed with any mechanism, whether it's Helm charts or whatever. I haven't seen one project containing so much software being deployed with one Helm install and having a day 0 and a day 1 and a day end, and secret rotation and configuration and cascading updates to get the system up to date and so on. I don't think there's anything out there that does that.
I actually hate to like stop the discussion at this point, but looking at the time, I think like people might need to leave for the next meeting. But like I think at this point, and I believe we had a similar point for the folks that were in Nuremberg at SUSE, kind of discussing. I think at that point there was this like different views on the topic where I believe like we don't have kind of enough common context to basically say how to take that part forward. So how to take like those individual Helm charts and if and what's needed to kind of get them together to something that looks like CF deployment today, and if and how that is required to kind of integrate all the pieces. So maybe that's then kind of the starting point for the next discussion, as I believe that is like closely related to the RHEL-int topic that we actually started with, to Yui's point. So we might consider taking that as a starting point for the next meeting. Having said that, thank you very much also to Anonymous Otter. I'm kind of assuming that is Swana taking notes there, but I was like glancing at the Google Doc, and it actually accurately reflects the discussion here. It's kind of hard to follow the discussion and take notes at the same time.
I think that was mostly me, Bernd.
Oh, Thanks, Eric. So you were actually able to follow the discussion, contribute, and take notes.
Some of it. We should link in the recording when we get it too. Yeah.
Okay, then thanks everybody. I'll set up the poll for the next time and kind of add that topic that is up to you.
Great, thanks, Bernd.